What role do you think Hollywood plays in raising awareness on critical issues like violent and organized crime? Today on The Balanced Voice, we sit down with Derek Potts, executive producer of the new Deepwater Productions film, Narco Sub. In this action-packed film, Derek and his team depict an American named Bruce Stryker. Bruce ultimately assisted the Colombian cartel in delivering their inventory into the United States to keep his family safe. This film presented our team with two critical questions. What lengths would you go to keep your family safe? And should Hollywood turn very serious topics like crime into action-packed films? Let's jump in to see how Derek responds to these two questions and more on today's balanced conversation about the role of the entertainment industry in public safety awareness. Without further ado, here's your host, Rania Mancarios.
Welcome to the Balanced Voice podcast. We are thrilled to partner with Deepwater Productions and Derek Potts this season to discuss their new film, Narco Sub. Today, we are joined by their executive producer, Derek Potts, to discuss this film and the real-life narcotics taking place in submarines via Colombia cartel. We'll be touching on that and human trafficking and so much more. Derek, welcome to the Balanced Voice podcast.
Great. It's very great to be here. Thank you.
Derek, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're an attorney. You've worked in for a long time in many different fields, but there's a reason you decided to make this film. Tell us a bit about you, your work, and why you ultimately decided to make the film.
You know, chief for me is being a lawyer. I run the Potts Law Firm here in Houston. We're a national law firm, but our main office is here in Houston. We handle cases all around the country. But a couple of years ago, I launched a film production company on the side, something that I personally really enjoy. I've always been a huge movie fan and always wanted to get into that, and then had some opportunities over the last 5-6 years to invest in some entertainment projects. And then last year launched this movie, Narco Sub.
Tell us, when people talk about the Colombia cartels, and it's wonderful to see in movies. It sort of takes you away from reality for a minute, but then you think this stuff isn't real. It doesn't really happen here. And what I thought was interesting is in one of the trailers that I watched, there's this editorial piece where one of the cast members says, they're targeting Americans. That was a very compelling sentence, because what are they targeting Americans for? Is it drugs? Is it trafficking? Is that even real?
Right. It is real, unfortunately. And, I think most Americans know about the drug trade. We've been hearing about it for decades and decades now, about cocaine and other drugs coming into the country and trying to stop it at the borders, whatnot. But I think very few people comparatively know about the human trafficking trade, which is just as real, if not bigger, than the drug trade. In fact, numbers you can find in research articles about it show that human trafficking results in more revenue for the illegal cartels than drug trafficking every year. And so the movie brings that to the forefront, that there's not just drugs coming into this country, there's people coming into this country, people in captive, people enslaved in various ways all the time. And they're coming in here across our borders. They're coming in here actually in submarines. They're coming in on planes, all different ways. And so we wanted to shed light on that through the movie.
And you, as an attorney, have actually seen this, because we see it at Crime Stoppers, and yet we'll get messages from the community that say, this is not really real. You're feeding a false narrative. You're trying to scare people, or this happens in the movies, but it's not really happening, or it's certainly not happening to the degree in which people need to pause and be concerned by it. But you're an attorney, and have you represented these types of cases, plaintiffs, or litigated these types of cases?
Oh, yes. Right now we're handling cases involving girls and women who were basically sexual slaves, sexual enslavement, forced into trafficking, basically kidnapped. I think there's two main types of sex trafficking. There's what we call international, and then there's domestic. International is where they bring girls and women from other countries into this country. And as a huge border state, we have a lot of that going on in Texas, unfortunately. Girls are brought from Central America, from Mexico, over the border into Texas, and then spread out throughout the country. And then domestic sex trafficking is where American citizens are kidnapped, either girls, minors, or adult females. They're kidnapped. They're forced into sexual slavery. It can happen here. It can happen overseas, and they can be brought back here. And we are representing victims of sex trafficking in both those areas that have been subjected to various forms of sexual enslavement in the state of Texas.
You mentioned the fact that, there's two forms of business practices, if you will. There's the drug trafficking, and then there's the human smuggling, the human trafficking, the sale of these people for funding. I want to take a break, but when we come back, I want you to talk to us about what do the numbers actually look like? I mean, is there a way to figure out how much they're making on drugs versus the sale of people, and why they might make more on the sale of people? We'll touch on that when we come back in a minute.
This balanced conversation is made possible by Brigitte and Bashar Kalai, Hallie Vanderheider, Sippy and AJ Karana, and Deepwater Productions. If you're interested in furthering our mission of facilitating balanced conversations, offering real solutions, contact us at thebalancedvoicepodcast.com.
So we're back. We're talking to Derek Potts, an attorney and executive producer of the film Narco Sub, which we think will be an important film for you to see. So we're talking about human trafficking. We know it involves the force, fraud, coercion, the sale of human beings for either labor trafficking or sex trafficking. And we also know that these organized, these gangs or these cartels are moving from the sale of drugs to the sale of people. Derek, why is that?
I think there's a big financial incentive. A drug sale occurs once and it's over. The people that are subjected to human and sex trafficking often stay within that system for months, if not years, sometimes. And so it's basically a continuous revenue stream. I mean, they kidnap girls, they put them in hotels, and they basically turn the hotels into mini brothels. And then it's a steady revenue stream for them as long as they can keep those girls. Oftentimes they're, heavily sedated. They're given narcotics, made to take narcotics. They don't sleep. They stay up 24 hours a day. And as long as they can keep them going, it's a constant stream of money for them.
I was reading a recent report. Well, it's September 2020, 13 U.S. cities that are, this is a quote, crowded. And this article was looking at Mexican drug cartels, but the idea of cartels in general. Chicago ranked number 1, LA number 2, Atlanta number 3, New York City number 6, but Houston was not that far behind at number 9, Dallas number 12. Do you think the average person is surprised to hear this? Do you think that they think that there's no way their life would ever intersect with these types of people or violence at this level?
Oh yeah, I think most average people have no idea what's going on. This is the dark underbelly of our society, and it's kept that way. It's not something anybody wants to talk about. Politicians don't want to talk about it. And so it's largely kept out of the public eye for a lot of reasons. The chief one being is just so disturbing to think that we have this going on in our community all the time when it is.
As we go from community to community, school to school, this is one of the topics we do want to address. And it's not a scare tactic. It's more of a public safety plea that people understand what's going on. We see the online solicitation of minors has gone up by 93%. We know the fact that it's easy to gain access to some of these children. We also think that it doesn't matter if it's a child or a woman or a man that's, a resident of this country or coming in from a foreign country. We have to care about the treatment of others, which is why we think what you're doing, obviously in the legal front lines, is so important, but also producing this film is a wonderful way of reaching a wide audience on topics that are sometimes difficult to digest and make real in your life. So how was that for you, going from the attorney reading cases, litigating or arguing these incredible cases, to actually creating a movie and producing a film like this?
It's a lot of work, but it's very gratifying. Movies are fun, they're entertainment, they're supposed to be a break for people. So much of what I do as a lawyer is so serious topics, seriously injured and harmed people. It's nice just personally to be able to get away from that, do something that's a little more lighthearted to a certain extent, because we're talking about movies and entertainment, which typically puts smiles on people's faces and is what everybody is escape. But we did make a point, as we've been talking about, to weave in some serious things to this film because we had the opportunity to do so, and it fits so neatly into the overall story that we thought it was also a great way kind of to raise awareness a little bit about sex trafficking and human trafficking.
Do you think the question that, people ask us is, these types of films, they're important? Some people call them entertaining. Some people see like the real life narratives and editorial lines that go through them. Some people think no, it's just all Hollywood. Do you, though, having worked with the victims that you've worked with and seeing what you see and knowing what you know, when you produce a film like this, do you worry that you're taking a very serious topic and making it lighthearted or entertaining?
I don't think so. The movie chiefly is entertainment. It's an action movie, but we have woven throughout it some serious topics just to raise awareness. When people leave that theater, they're going to think, I didn't know that people are actually brought into this country and captive. I didn't know that Americans are actually targeted for kidnapping and sex trafficking. That does happen. I think if we just put that in their mind for the very first time, we've accomplished something. Maybe a secondary objective from the movie, but we've accomplished something as well. The other piece of the movie that is not just entertainment is the human element. The movie's about a man, American hero really, whose family is kidnapped by the cartel, and he's forced to do criminal activities to save their lives. And, that's the human psychological element of the movie that we also just want to be a little bit thought provoking, right? Like, how far will we as people go to protect our families? And then where is that moral line? Where do we cross that? And that's more of the philosophical underside of the film that we're also putting out there to just provoke some thoughts in the audience.
And I think those are such interesting questions because we deal with victims all the time, whether it be victims of trafficking or victims of domestic violence, who will say, we're forced to do things we never imagined we would do just to survive. And I think the layered on question you're asking is, what would you do in your case, as the film talks about, as a parent, as a father trying to protect his family? I mean, these are crazy questions. People think it's just so out there. It's so extreme. It's not real. But we're literally seeing this from the victim's perspective all the time at Crime Stoppers. And I think you're seeing that is through your work as an attorney.
Yes. I mean, I see the pain that families experience when their family members are subjected to whatever it is. It could be human trafficking. It could be an explosion in a factory that they didn't put the proper safeguards in place. It could be, a medical error in a hospital where they didn't have the right policies in place. So I see people dealing with the pain and suffering of those situations every day. And it's powerful emotions. I mean, we're made to protect our family, protect our offspring. And then how far are people willing to take that? And the movie explores that topic.
So, Derek, you've worked a long time as an attorney. You've dealt with some extreme situations. You're now producing films that I think ask really, really important questions. But, what would you do? I mean, what lengths would you take to protect your family? What lengths would I take to protect my family? I'll tell you right now, as a mom of three, I'm often in heels and a long skirt with my scarf but I say, if anybody were to touch my child, I mean, there's no limits. I can't even imagine. There's nothing I wouldn't do to protect them. I mean, what do you ask yourself that question?
I do. And I'm a father of two. I feel exactly the same way. I mean, if you just put the thought in your head of something terrible happening to one of your children by somebody else, I mean, well, the sky's the limit of what you would do to protect them and get them back. And, I see that too as a trial lawyer when we have jury trials and, people are put in the shoes of the people that are injured. Mm-hmm. And we're trained as trial lawyers to try to reach to the jury's psychological bearings to make them worry about themselves, right? If they don't take action in this case, it could happen to them and their family, because it is such a powerful emotion that we all have. I think we all agree that it's really even hard to gauge how far we might all go.
And the way the legal system is now, and we are following constantly, where we are in terms of legislation, and obviously states vary. We're in the state of Texas, both of us at this time. Are you comfortable with where we are? If you're a family that's been victimized, you have a child that's gone missing, you've been made aware of a trafficking case, are the laws where they need to be to protect victims of trafficking?
In the trafficking arena, I'd say yes. I mean, there's both some good state and federal laws, and I think that as the word gets out about how serious this problem is, that the legislators are continuing to look at it. And there are some good statutes that enable us to go after the not only the perpetrators, but people that assist in the industry, I'll call it, of trafficking. I mean, a lot of the lawsuits in Houston, not just by me, but by other lawyers, are not against the traffickers. It's against businesses who allow the trafficking to go on their premises. And because it's hard to collect money from a sex trafficker. It's a lot easier to collect money from a business that allowed it to go on and allowed unsafe victimization of sometimes children to occur on their premises.
And it's an interesting point, because it's not that the trafficker doesn't have plenty of funds. I know that they make hundreds of thousands off of their victims, but it's the fact that legally, I think there's a lot of grounds to be made off of hurting businesses financially who allow this type of practice. And I think that's actually where we should be focusing our efforts.
Yeah, if we can stop the places where the sex trafficking is occurring, we can really put a dent in sex trafficking, because they have to have a place to conduct the criminal activity, whether it's hotels or other types of businesses. And I think the general thinking amongst the lawyers handling these types of cases is if we can stop that from happening, it can have a major impact on trafficking as a whole.
I love the work you're doing. The film is really fascinating. We thank you. You're partnering with Crime Stoppers as you're pushing this film out across the country. Other films, do you have other films in the works?
We do. We're hoping to produce 2 to 3 more films this year. We're still exploring our options, but we have a lot of scripts that are coming in, and we're planning, as soon as this is launched here on January 22nd, to move on to the new projects.
When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about what that was like for you to go from your seat as an attorney to your seat as an executive producer. We'll be back in a moment.
Crime Stoppers of Houston is thrilled to announce a partnership with Deepwater Production. Beginning Friday, January 22nd, you can download their new film, Narco Sub, via the link in our show notes, and a portion of the proceeds will be donated to Crime Stoppers in support of our mission to solve and prevent serious crime in partnership with citizens, media, and the criminal justice system. To learn more about the film, visit narcosub.mypixieset.com.
You definitely are on this really fascinating journey as an attorney who also loves the film industry and sees a lot of power in pop culture and mass markets. I love seeing what you're doing, but I also like to see what you're doing in terms of crime victim litigation. There seems to have been a really unique evolution in the law there. Can you talk to us about that?
Well, yeah, I think the Me Too movement had a lot to do with it. I think that just not tolerating various forms of sexual abuse has really allowed new litigations to evolve. I mean, we've all followed in the news, the scandal at the University of Michigan, the swimmers that are fighting back against the swimming associations for serial abuse. You have obviously people suing the Catholic diocese. You have the Boy Scouts case. And so all this did not exist, even 5-10 years ago. And so it's all kind of evolved. I think Me Too movement really started it. And so civil litigation is what I'm talking about, filing lawsuits against either the perpetrators of the sexual abuse or the institutions or companies that allowed it to go on. And so there's a lot of that. I think it's a great thing. It's helping stop sex abuse inside of our country from any source, whether it's college kids being sexually abused by coaches to people at the Catholic diocese. And so we're handling a lot of those cases. I know a lot of other attorneys are, and I think it's going to continue.
I think those are some of the most, and I'm so glad you brought it up, because I think those are some of the most important movements in law over the last few years, giving victims really actually giving victims a voice against these powerhouses they often have to fight to seek justice. And I applaud you and other attorneys across the country that are not afraid to stand up and fight for victims in this case and in those cases. And I'm very proud Crime Stoppers of Houston worked with victims' parents whose children were sexually assaulted, at times even raped in camps and sleepaway camps during the summer. And we worked to change legislation a few years ago, and I was shocked by how difficult it was for the victims to even have a voice, for the victims to even get together to say, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 12-year-olds were sexually assaulted at prominent camps across this country. But I agree with you. I think the Me Too movement handed the mic to the victims, and how powerful that is. Do you have hope for the future in this area? Do you think anything, people have said the Me Too movement will backfire and companies won't want to hire women. And that was the big thing we heard at the time. Do you feel like that's the case with any of the things that you're seeing? I hope not.
Not at all. I mean, I think the examples we've talked about, the Catholic diocese, the Boy Scouts cases, I mean, I think the litigation brought about social change, which is good. I mean, in a lot of those cases, it was almost part of the culture for that sex abuse to be allowed to go on. They would just turn a blind eye. And, the criminal justice system can go only so far. It's mainly focused on the individual that perpetrated the crime. The civil justice system is there to go after the people that maybe assisted in the crime, that cannot be held criminally liable, but they benefited in some way from the crime occurring on their watch, in their business, in their program, whatever it might be.
Do you see a day when we'll hold tech giants liable? Especially with trafficking victims? Is that ever going to happen?
We're trying to. There are lawsuits against some of the big tech giants right now going forward. It's the new frontier, I guess you'd say, of litigation, because it's not been done yet. And the first time you do something in the law, it's always the hardest and takes the longest, and it usually requires you to go up in what we call make new law at the very top appellate court level. And so those cases are going forward now, and hopefully in the next 2 years, there will be change brought to the big tech companies.
Well, I know a lot of people will support that. A lot of people. And Derek, we thank you. I'm fascinated. Again, I started by saying I'm fascinated by your transition into film. Any words for those watching who are interested in not switching careers, because that's not at all what you've done, but picking up a passion?
I think highly recommend it. I mean, it's like anything else. When you start something new, there's a lot of work, a lot of learning. We've certainly had our learning experiences and learning curve as we've produced the movie, but overall it's been extremely thrilling experience and a satisfying experience to do something else.
Derek Potts, we thank you. You're a great partner to Crime Stoppers of Houston, a great voice for victims across the state of Texas and really across the country. We look forward to partnering with you and sharing with you all how you can tune into the Narco Sub film. We thank you again, and we'll catch you next time on the Balanced Voice podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to today's Balanced Conversation. You can find real solutions and tangible resources in our show notes at thebalancedvoicepodcast.com. To join the conversation, follow us on Instagram at The Balanced Voice Podcast and on Twitter at @BalancedVoice_. Stay up to date on Runya's work by following her at The Runya Report, and we can't wait to see you next week for another Balanced Conversation.